Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Liz, and on behalf of Congregation Haskalah, welcome. Just a few pieces of housekeeping. We are recording this. If you would like to not be seen while speaking, simply turn your camera off. And we ask that you put your questions in the chat box and remain muted throughout. And you can also use the raise hand function. And to introduce you to Richard Dansky, who is going to be speaking to us today about his piece. He's a 20-year veteran of the video game industry, where he's written for games like The Division, Splinter Cell, Blacklist, and numerous others. He's published 7 novels and 1 short fiction collection, and was a contributor to White Wolf Game Studios' World of Darkness games. He lives in North Carolina with a cat named Goblin, who he swears was named that when he got her. Hi, Rich. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Doing good. All right. Now we had, do you want to start with us playing the reading, or do you want to talk about, set up the story at all?
Well, why don't I set up the story a little bit? First of all, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. The story that you're going to get a reading from is called On Seas of Blood and Salt. It was the lead story in the Book of Jewish Horror, which is an anthology that came out last year, just in time for Hanukkah. And it's the third in my sequence of Red Palash stories, featuring a historical figure whom I've magicked up a little bit for the sake of fiction. The story is about Red Palash and his pirate crew. This is actually taken from history. Red Palash was in fact a pirate. There was a great deal of Jewish piracy that happened after the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And so I thought that would be an interesting idea for a story. It goes back actually to an anthology called The New Hero, which was edited by Robin Laws. And he asked me for ideas for a new heroic character. And I gave him 3 ideas, one of which was a psychic detective, one of which was set during the Civil War, and one of which was a magical pirate rabbi. And he wrote back to me and said, as soon as you said magical pirate rabbi, we were done. So I've written 3 stories featuring this character. This is the third. It was originally ticketed for an anthology called Cadaver Bone that never got off the ground. And so I repurposed it to the Jewish Book of Horror, where they were very happy to have it. I am very pleased to say. It was also published at the the podcast Pseudopod, which is a horror podcast. And it was an honor to be broadcast there. And so without further ado, why don't we give you a little bit of the story, and then we can talk about it more afterwards on the back end.
All right, that sounds good. I'm going to pull up this great reading we have from Pseudopod itself. I'm going to share my screen. All right, and here we go.
On Seas of Blood and Salt by Richard Dansky. This is what Reb Palash does when he finds a ship crewed by the dead. He does not know it is crewed by the dead, not at first. He is in his cabin, discoursing with the nameless angel who speaks in the silences of his mind. They are speaking of the Pirkei Avot and debating the words of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who held that a man who was pleasing to others was pleasing to Hashem, but that a man who was displeasing to others was in turn displeasing to the Lord. When a great shout comes down from the crow's nest. "A ship! The lookout!" the lookout says. "Dead ahead and low in the water!" And these words that rain down are caught and carried by the men on deck, passed along and repeated, until one pounds on Palash's door in his excitement. "It is ill tidings," the angel says, "but they are ones that cannot go unheard." "And if these tidings are pleasing to the men, are they also not pleasing to Hashem?" the Rebbe jokes gently as he rises from where he sits cross-legged on the floor. "I asked Reb Ben Dosa a question as he sat in his study," the angel replied. "What of the man who is displeasing to his fellow men because he is pleasing to the Lord?" And for that he had no answer. Reb Palash does not reply. There is no time for him to do so. For again the sailor is pounding on the door, and now he is shouting, "Rebbe, Reb Palash, there is a ship!" It has been a while since they have taken a ship, Reb Palash knows. The oceans are vast, and even the greatest galleons are small adrift in it. And the men in his pay who work in the treasure houses of his enemies have fallen silent of late. It would be good to take a ship. The men would find it pleasing. So says Rev Palash to himself, and steps out on the deck. The sailor at his door is beside himself with excitement. It is one of the younger men. The older ones would know better. The first growth of his beard has just come in, sparse black hairs curling over a weak chin, and his eyes are wide and blue. Joachim, his name is. Palash remembers him now, a dock rat from Zeebrugge, who had demanded at Rusty Dagger Point to be taken aboard. He is earnest, and he is eager, and he is too young to think that death will ever find him. "Tell me of this ship," Palash says, and Joachim beams. "There," he says, and leads his captain to the bow. "Can you see her?" Indeed, Palash can, though she is near the limits of vision. It is a merchant vessel he sees, and it seems as if he has not been seen in return. But that's not possible. They are too close, with the rising sun framing them against the brilliant sea. There should be alarms ringing out across the water. There should be cries of defiance and orders given. There should be, above all, action on that lonely ship. And yet there is nothing as she sails on, serene and unconcerned. He frowns and reaches for the spyglass. Someone puts it in his hand and he raises it to his eye. Now the ship comes into sharp focus, and the reason she has not fled is clear. She is wounded, this one, wounded and barely afloat. One of her masts is cracked. It hangs over the rail, canvas dragging in the water behind it like a ragged seabird's wing. Only a few sails remain set, and they are rent by wind and storm. Ropes dangle and twist in the wind. Some are unbound, others have snapped and been left to hang. She flies no flag, this mystery ship, flies no nation's or captain's colors. By all rights, Palash thinks, she should be abandoned. And yet she is not. For he can see figures on her deck, and others in the tatters of her rigging. There are men on board, men who move slowly and patiently about their tasks, men who, he thinks, might be glad of rescue, but have not hailed his ship. "There is still time to turn away," the angel says. Palash frowns.
That is a perfect time to stop with the angel warning them away. You can check out the rest of the story on Pseudopod or in the Jewish Book of Horror. My name is Rachel Zane. I'm a member of Haskalah, and I have known Rich for more years than either of us want to acknowledge. We grew up together in Jewish youth group in high school. So we've known each other forever through our dorky stages and back to our dorky stages, so to speak. But I'm going to ask the first question, and then Liz and I are going to pepper Rich with some of your questions and others if you write them in the chat, and kind of give you an idea of what this is all about. The first one is sort of obvious. How does Judaism lend itself naturally to the horror genre? Like how did Judaism play into your getting into horror?
Well, that's sort of a two-pronged answer. One is, obviously, if you look at the history of the Jewish people, there is horror aplenty. There are pogroms, there's persecution, there's the Holocaust. There is so much of what would be regarded as horror in a fictional context. The other is that we have this incredibly rich mythology with Judaism of creatures like Dybbuk's and Golems and Lilith and Mazik. And so there's so much there to draw upon from the fictional side of things. And it creates a really rich blend. I think the book, The Jewish Book of Horror, did a wonderful job of melding the two and creating a perfect melange of what could be defined as Jewish horror.
And what about the royal Reb Palash? You said he was sort of a fictionalized version of himself. What more can you tell us about him?
Well, he was the chief rabbi of Amsterdam, if I remember correctly. And if you want to learn more about him, I highly recommend a book called Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, which is where I first ran across him. And he is a swashbuckler, an adventurer, and also a merchant and a spy, and just one of those people who seems like he was built on too many points to be true. He's just a fantastic fictional, character. And when I saw him, I knew I had to do something with him. I knew I had to take him and write his story, whatever that story might be. And then I just added the fictional element of the angel sitting on his shoulder, talking to him, because that would enable me, one, to get a little more into the Jewish nature of the story by having the dialogue between the two of them, and two, to make it more of a fantasy, to make it more, less of historical fiction and more of fantastic fiction.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask the question I know that a lot of us might be asking is, are there other Reb stories in the works, in the can? And is there a collection on the horizon?
There are 3 Red Palash stories. There's the first one. There's the second one, which was Red Palash and the Dybbuk. That only came out in a very limited edition Kickstarter reward. So it's very hard to find. And then there was this one, the third one. I'm hoping to write more. I have to get myself right into that space, which I haven't been as of late because of various and sundry things, but I do want to write more with the character. He's an incredibly fun character to write, and the interplay he has with the angel is really great stuff for a writer to play with. In terms of a collection, there's no plan for a Red Palash collection, but hopefully I'll be putting out another short story collection next year.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember you saying, I can't remember the exact quote, but if Reb Palash just strikes you as this like movie character, like that is beyond real. How did your background with White Wolf help you with some of your writing in horror and other aspects of the genre?
For those of you who don't know, White Wolf was a tabletop role-playing game company. Think Dungeons and Dragons, but for people who listen to The Cure.
The perfect description.
That is absolutely the perfect description.
Yeah.
And we made games where you could pretend to be vampires or werewolves or ghosts or wizards or elves in the modern day. And so they were very dark and had a real tinge of horror to them. And this let me practice my writing in a professional setting. I worked on over 130 books for White Wolf in the time that I spent with them, both as a freelancer and in-house. And it also introduced me to people in the horror genre, people like P.D. Kashik and other writers who were interested in what we were doing, or whom I could just, now speak to as a professional. And that got me into the professional writing space. My first novel was actually a tie-in to some of the stuff that we did with White Wolf. It was a vampire novel, and it featured vampires fighting each other in the streets of Buffalo, New York, and all sorts of crazy things. It's actually just been republished by Crossroad Press. It's called La Sombra, and it's it was a great on-the-job training to work at White Wolf and learn how to become a writer while writing. It was I didn't have any real formal training as a writer. I had one writing class in college. That was it. But in the process of creating all these books, all these stories, all these resources for people to play their games with, I became a professional writer.
Were there any particular influences? Like, did you have anyone in your life that pushed you in that direction, or any authors that really pulled you into the field?
When I was very young and sick with chickenpox, my mother gave me a copy of Ray Bradbury's The Halloween Tree. and that was it. That was where I was going from that point onwards. I didn't always know it, but that book was such a foundational influence on me. It is my favorite book. For those of you who have not read it, it is a very short young adult book about the origins of Halloween, and it's the story of several children who passed through the history of Halloween in order to save a friend of theirs. And it is gloriously illustrated by Joseph McNaney. It's just a fantastic book, and that got me started on the path to what I do today. In terms of other authors who have influenced me, you can't be a horror author and not be influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, kind of dodgy personal life, but just spectacular vision. Also, Charles Grant, who was the inventor of what's called quiet horror. I learned a great deal from reading his stuff and the very few times I was able to meet him. Just a fantastic gentleman. And a North Carolina writer named Manly Wade Wellman, who specialized in stories that felt like folklore. So if you get a chance to check his work out, I highly recommend it.
How did you end up getting connected with the Jewish Book of Horror? Is that something like an editor decides to pursue and then finds the authors, or do you guys know each other and start working on a project together?
The editor of the book, Josh Schlossberg, put out an open call, which just said, hey, we're looking for stories. And I had my third Red Palash story, and I put that in there, and I said to myself, oh God, I'd better make this one, or I'm gonna have to turn in my card. But I was very pleased with the story. I thought it was a very strong story, and Josh and the folks at the Denver Horror Collective who put the book out seemed to agree. And so I was just very, very pleased that they liked it. And it's an incredibly strong lineup of Jewish writers, Rami Ungar, John Baltusberger, just fabulous folks. And it's a pleasure to be part of that crew.
In terms of the story Salt and Magic, how is that such an intrinsically Jewish one? Besides the rabbi and some of the characters and the angel, you've got some other elements that pop in, like the wooden trunk of magical items that might have some Jewish and some magical kind of connotations. So how did that did you do some research into Jewish mysticism or some other things there? Or
I did. I would hardly call myself an expert. As for the box, I don't know what's in it. I will know when the Reb tells me.
Besides the magic salt, it's all
Yes.
all a mystery.
What's in there is what needs to be in there.
Very Mary Poppins-esque.
Yes.
Pirate Mary Poppins. Now there's an idea.
Crossover.
Quick, somebody write that down.
Do you have a special process when it comes to writing the different kinds of fiction that you're involved with? Because you're involved with so many different styles and different sections of, like, with video games, short fiction, novels. Is it different for each one, or is the process sort of similar?
I keep things very different from my video game writing and my fiction writing. The video game writing is my day job. I actually go into the office so I can have that sort of commute as an airlock, where I seal that off and draw lines, draw boundaries. And it is a very regimented process. It's something that's highly collaborative. You don't make anything in a video game on your own unless you're a very small team, and I work on projects that have large teams. So I do everything I do in conjunction with a great many other people. I come home, I feed the cat, and then I go upstairs to write my own stuff, and it is very individualistic. It is solo. I have, for lack of a better way of putting it, my writer's rituals. Every project that I write for at home, I have a particular playlist of music that is appropriate to that project, so I can put that music on and my brain goes, oh, now it's time to write this short story. Oh, now it's time to write this novel. And I do that. I light a candle for suitably spooky illumination. Occasionally I'll pour myself a finger of scotch and just let it sit there and be writerly. But I have these rituals that are there for my personal writing that aren't there for my day job.
do you have you ever written any other genres, or have you always been drawn to horror?
I've written 3 fantasy novels, a trilogy called The Trilogy of the Second Age, which was a tie-in to a tabletop game called Exalted. And that was a lot of fun and had a lot of running around with magic bows and arrows and a fight with a soul hunter on a giant orrery, and just completely over the top. I went completely nuts with it, and I had a great time with it. You know, floating city in the center of a volcano, and you name it. It was, if it was crazy, it was in there.
That's a very different playlist.
Oh yeah, the playlist of that one was the Lord of the Rings soundtracks.
Exactly.
And by the time I was done with the last book in the series, I could only listen to one song off one album. So I finished the book, I turned the manuscript, I popped the CD out of the CD drive, which tells you how long ago this was, and I snapped the CD in half, like never listening to this again.
Put it on the shelf and
yeah. But I've actually also done one book of military fiction, which was a tie-in to the video game Ghost Recon, which is one of the Tom Clancy video games. And so that was a very different and very interesting challenge for me, because there are no supernatural elements, there's no fantastical elements. And it was trying to write a story that was very grim and gritty and down to earth, and not something that I had tried before, but it seemed to have come out all right. People really seem to like the book. It's called Dark Waters.
yeah, it's much different world building in that case.
Yes. Yeah. Have you written any that are, well, when you write the ones that are sequels, do you find it more challenging to write the first piece in the series or to write the subsequent? Is it hard to like split them into 3, or?
Once I know who the characters are, then everything else gets a lot easier. My writing is all character driven. Once I know these characters, I know them well, I know how they'll react in various scenes, then I can just sort of let them go and they pull me along. I'm not one of those writers that says, oh yes, my characters talk to me in my head. They don't do that, but I know who they are. If I've written them well, I know how they will react in a given situation. Sometimes it's not how I want them to react for the plot, but they have to be true to themselves, and that'll lead me to a good place ultimately. Sometimes, you know, there's projects where I don't know where they're going halfway through, but I trust the characters, and the characters always bring me home.
Have you based any characters on real life people, or have any particular rabbis been influenced on Red Palanche?
No particular rabbis. I did not know any rabbis growing up who were pirates. They might have had a sideline. I don't know about, you know, the rabbinical side hustles that were going on in those days, but they did not seem particularly piratical, the ones I knew growing up. There's a process.
Although it could have been Rabbi Abraham's side job. He would have been the type.
This is true. This is true. In terms of putting real life people into books, there's a process called Tuckerization, which has been going on for ages and ages. It's when people put real life people into their books. And I admit to Tuckerizing a few friends, particularly in the upcoming Ghost of a Marriage, which will be out the end of this week. But I've actually been Tuckerized a couple times, once as a rabbi in the book Fireworks by James A. Moore, and also as a rabbi, I think, by Myrtle Lafferty in one of her books.
I'd say that's a compliment.
Yes, I was very pleased and humbled by that.
That's great.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah.
Liz and I are starting to run out of ours.
I put something in the chat. I basically want to know about research. Did this require a lot of research on various characters? Specifically the Jewish characters.
Very much so. I wanted to make sure that it was absolutely appropriate and absolutely factual. So there was research both on Red Palanche and his ships and things like that, and research on the Jewish mysticism that he would be indulging in. And so I won't claim to be an expert, and if you pin me down, I probably wouldn't have all the answers at this point, but I certainly did do a lot of research. And if I go back to Red Palash, I'm going to do a lot more.
And was there any specific way you went about the research?
Just reading like crazy. This is what I do. Find the sources. I was actually trained as a master's in lit, so I had a good background in research, so I could go after stuff that way. And then, these days in the land of Google, you can find pretty much anything you need if you just phrase your questions correctly. So I went after it and found what I thought made for an interesting story and made for interesting quotes, the Mendoza quote, for example, and went from there. And then the character of the rabbi took me where I needed to go for the rest of the story.
And did you have to go to the Zohar?
No, I did not. I'm saving that for further research for further projects.
When
Okay.
you do a series, is it more difficult to start it or to continue it?
It's always hard to start. There's what they talk about, what they mean, the tyranny of the blank page. Once you get started and hopefully you know your characters and where they're going, then you can sort of move faster with it. I joke that there's 3 stages to writing a project. There's, oh God, how am I ever going to fill this word count? Hey, I think I've got my word count. Oh God, I don't have enough word count. So it's a roller coaster. It starts with the uphill climb to where you're getting all the pieces in place, you're introducing all the characters, you're establishing relationships, you're setting everything up, and then it goes straight downhill really fast until you're like, oh my God, am I going to be able to fit all this in by the end?
Do you normally work with an end, like a size for the writing, that a word count do you aim for? Or
for my novels, I generally aim for about 90,000 words. That's a good solid read. That's about 400 pages. And so that's where I target. My first original novel was 107,000 words after rewrites. So I bounce around a little bit, but I target 90,000 words for novels as a good length for what I do. If I have to write longer, we'll see if I'll write longer. The current project is promising to be a longer one. We'll see where that goes.
And your short stories?
5,000 words is kind of the sweet spot for the short stories, but I've published ones as short as 2,200 and as long as 16,000.
sometimes you only need 2,200.
Yep.
With Palash being an actual historical figure, and did he leave behind a family? I'm not fictional stuff, but what do you know about?
Okay, it's cutting in and out a little bit, Lee, but I think you were asking, do we know anything of the real Red Palash's family today?
Yeah, are there actual die as a pirate, or did he die of old age in Amsterdam?
What was the end of him?
If I remember correctly, he died of old age in Amsterdam and did have a family. Again, it has been a little while since I've written him, so I need to double check. But again, that book, The Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean, is a great source and has some fantastic material on him.
You
And
said he
so-
was like
It
one of the
was.
first ambassadors to from one country to another and some other stuff.
Yep. Definitely a fascinating guy and someone whom we should know more about, but whom history has sort of sanded over.
If anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to bring up, you can feel free to throw it in the chat.
Are these sold in local small bookstores? If you want to go into one of the locals? bookstores like Let's Play Books or things like that? I have no idea.
If they don't have them, they can order them.
Okay, so if I want to buy from a specific little bookstore, I can go in and say, I want the book, and they'll get it for me.
Yes.
They should be able to order it, yes.
Okay,
These are available through book distributors, so it shouldn't be a problem.
And bookshop.org lets you support local bookstores that you want to support with your online purchase if you can't find it locally. It's a great way to do both at the same time. But we will plug just a little bit. If you are not reticent to Amazon, Amazon Smiles, you can support Haskalah with.
We are listed as a Christian group in error, but yes, it is us. Sign up.
I was going to ask the last question I was going to ask is, have you ever seen any crossover type styles with Judaism being sort of a part of some of the more fantastical mythical creatures, like, you know, Sasquatches and werewolves that have some Jewish perspectives too?
Gollum,
Yeah.
Sasquatch crossovers.
Yeah.
There have been plenty of those. There's at least 2 series that I know of about Jewish werewolf detectives.
Awesome.
And so those are out there. SP Somtow had the Sasquatches being a lost tribe of Israel in his Achillead books. They migrated to the Pacific Northwest for the Lox. So yeah, there
Why
is
not?
plenty of that folklore in there. Even DC Comics and Marvel Comics have Jewish characters. Again, you know, so many of the original creators of so many of the superheroes were Jewish, that there's a strong Jewish strain in a lot of that. Ben Grimm, the Thing from the Fantastic Four, for example, is Jewish.
Yep.
We are involved in a lot of the, I can't remember the famous author's name, but there's been some of the real giants in the superhero world were Jewish as well.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you being with us, Rich. We really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed getting a chance to shine a light on your writing, because I've been a big fan since, well, high school. So, but, you know, it's just important for me to share you with everybody.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And it has been a real pleasure to do this today. If folks have any other questions, happy to stick around and answer them about writing, Jewish Book of Horror, you name it. This is what I do. I've been very lucky in that I am able to write for a living, and it's a pleasure of mine to share what I do with folks.
And definitely, if you are in the mood to listen to a great reader read some of Rich's work, he has 3 or so stories featured on Pseudopod, not just on Seas of Blood and Salt, but several others as well. So you can search their backlogs for Rich's work as is featured there as well.
Yeah. And if I can plug for 1 second, this week is the release of my novel, Ghost of a Marriage.
So you will have 8 novels now, not just 7.
Yes, so this will be coming out on Thursday, and I'm very proud of it. It's a very personal story, but it's also full of ghosts. So there's a ghost in it, there's a marriage in it. What more could you ask for?
It was a great read. I just finished it, so I will plug it as well. It was a great read. Oh, I have one question. Is there any kind of scene that you don't like writing in your novels?
I don't like writing really graphic horror. I'm not my horror is psychological. I deal with ghosts. I deal with the uncanny. I deal with that sort of thing. I'm not very good at writing messy stuff with red stuff splattered all over the walls. I just tried my first splatterpunk story for an anthology, so we'll see how that goes. But even then, I'm like, no. Okay, fine. We have to have some messiness here.
Something gets dismembered here or there, just throw it in.
Yes. Oh, fine. We'll tear a guy's head off. Okay.
You didn't need that eyeball.
No. The phrase
about,
"like a walnut" gets used.
What about romancy things and stuff like that?
Those I tend to need help with as well.
I don't like them.
I'm not a very romantic guy, so.
Not true.
Oh, thank you. But
I have to say that Rich was my senior prom date, so.
and she's still speaking to me, which is the amazing thing.
Not speaking mine.
Well, I don't know, so I'm not familiar with Pseudopod. Is that some kind of an app that you get?
It's a podcast, so you would go to the website and you can click play and it plays through your speakers. So it's usually a couple people discussing the piece and then a reading. And what else does Pseudopod do in their podcast, Rich?
That's pretty much it. They do a brief introduction, then the reader reads the story, and then there's a little bit of a wrap up at the end. But they are one of the premier markets for horror fiction. They publish a lot of great stories, and it is an honor that they have chosen to publish some of mine.
And it's all done right on the website, so it's free. You can access it wherever. So it's really cool. It's like audiobooks, but for short story horror fiction.
You don't have to download anything unless you want to. So it's easy to use. I can email you the link if you need it later. Okay. All right. Thank you everybody for being here. I'm gonna kill the recorder.
I would like to make a comment.
Yes.
Go for it.
I want to thank you all for doing the audiobooks, and I didn't know about this Pseudopod thing. I'm legally blind and my wife is completely blind, and so we deal with the library access services. So we tend to get books from audiobooks that we play through an audiobook player and things like that. So we're able to get some of these books, but knowing that short stories and things like that, anything where we have readings and things can be read to us, it's wonderful. So I just want to thank you all for, catching on board with that and being a part of that.
Are you able to get the links out of the chat? If not, I can email them to you.
Actually, email would be great. I did my best to try to link, and then I messaged myself the the different links, but emailing would be great just in case they don't come out. That would be great.
You got it.
Yes, and Pseudopod is actually part of a network of websites. There's Escape Pod that does science fiction. There's Podcastle that does fantasy, and I forget the name of the young adult one, but there's a whole series of them for short fiction if you're interested. Wonderful stuff. The editors are wonderful people, and they get some of the best names in the industry writing for them.
Gotcha. Well, I will say my ex-husband, he was the one that introduced me to D&D and the whole gamut of tabletop role play and everything. And when we got to White Wolf, I was like, oh, I love this system so much more. So in the messages in the chat, I was like, sorry, I prefer White Wolf over D&D. And we're still using, my wife and I, we do tabletop gaming also with family, and we use that D10 system of White Wolf and World of Darkness and all of that. So it was like, as soon as I saw that, oh, he did White Wolf, I gotta register for that. So thank you all.
You're quite welcome. I was at White Wolf for 4 years in-house. I was in charge of Wraith the Oblivion, Vampire the Dark Ages, Kindred of the East, a little bit of Werewolf the Wild West, and I wrote for all of the lines. So if you've played White Wolf stuff, you've probably read some of my stuff.
Cool. And I've been wanting to do a Old West, like 1800s based game. So when you mentioned the when you mentioned the West there, I was like, oh, I got to see about checking that one out. So thank
Okay,
you for
cool.
mentioning that.
You're
So
welcome. Hope you
thank
enjoy it.
you. It was great to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you so much for coming today.
Sandra, you want to go ahead? I see you got your hand raised. You can just unmute. Maybe it was an accidental hand. Oh, there you go.
The name of the book he read as a child.
Oh, the name of the book you read as a child that you loved.
That would be The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury.
Okay, thank you.
You're quite welcome. I'm actually lucky enough to own a piece of original art from the book. It is my most prized possession. When the Ray Bradbury estate had an auction of their belongings a few years ago, I was able to sneak in and get a piece of illustration from the book itself, which now hangs in a place of honor in my house.
Is it appropriate for children up like 10-year-old kids?
Yes, that's very much who it's aimed at.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Barbara on the phone.
Yes, hi, I am. This is delightful. Thank you. Just kind of a comment. I've always liked horror stories. Well, I'm a reader of all things, but I've always liked horror stories. And I honestly have never, and I'm a Jewish person, but I've never thought about a Jewish horror as a genre. So whether all right, some are Jewish, some are everybody else like Edgar Allan Poe, I've never thought about it this way, I'd like to say. But this is wonderful and nice to see always young, talented, and keep up the good work. And I will look for Pseudopod. This is not something I also would have known about, but I will go discover that. So thank you all.
Thank you. Hope you enjoy Pseudopod, and it's been a pleasure having you here.
Same. Nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Anybody